Hey everybody, it's Glenn. I've recently dug out my X-Men Onslaught action figures from way back in 1997. It's hard to believe that it's been that long, but hey, the older you get, the quicker time flies. The reason why I've dug them out will become apparent with a custom action figure that I'm currently working on. I hope to post a video of that custom in the next few days, so stay tuned for that. And I thought while I've dug them out, I may as well do a bit of a random retro review of them, just in case anybody's interested in some pre-Legends vintage Toy Biz. So first up here is Onslaught himself. I purchased my set of these figures the first time I ever went to New York in 1997. And I don't know if anyone's been to New York now. Toys R Us have that big flagship fancy toy shop in Times Square, has the big kind of fairground ride inside, friendly staff welcoming you in. Well, back in 1997 that wasn't there. There was a regular Toys R Us in Herald Square, which is much more of the Toys R Us that we're all familiar with half-open toys kicking around the floor and menacing staff that just stare blankly at you. So at that Toys R Us, I managed to find all the figures in the action figure aisle except Onslaught here. Disappointed with that, as Onslaught was the one figure that I really wanted. I took the remaining figures to check out, and amazingly I found this Onslaught figure here in the clearance bin, right by the checkout. I guess someone had just decided, second thoughts on buying him and just kind of dumped him in the bin, and I was fortunate enough to pick him out of there. So I've always kept my Onslaught figure here in package. As you see here, see back to reveal the true identity of Onslaught, and if you flip the back over, it's actually cut away the card, and if you look into the bubble you can see Professor X trapped inside Onslaught. Onslaught's true identity is Professor Charles Xavier! Exclamation! You can also see all the other figures in the series here. Wolverine Unleashed, Jean Grey, Apocalypse Rising. Here is Onslaught out of package, and key to this figure is the power armour. This power armour is actually removable. So what's cool is you get both phases of Onslaught. Onslaught phase 1 here, and phase 2 once you've added the power armour. Of course, this is the look of Onslaught that I love, with the Magneto helmet. Turn around and maybe you can see a bit better Professor X inside the bubble on his back there. And the look of the figure is very well observed from the comic book art of the time. Now, of course, the articulation by modern standards today is very limited, but for 1997 had all the standard articulation of the time. Arms, legs, head. There is actually some wrist articulation there that at the time a lot of figures didn't have. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the pre-Legends Onslaught alongside his Build-A-Figure Marvel Legends counterpart. I always find it fun comparing pre-Legends figures to their Marvel Legends counterparts. It's just fascinating to see how action figure sculpting, painting, articulation has evolved over the last 10 to 15 years. Pre-Legends figures just look positively primitive now, but to me they'll always embody a certain nostalgia for the comic books of the time, the animated series of the 90s. But one thing I would say that this pre-Legends figure does have in his favour is that he does have the transforming armour, so you get both versions of Onslaught. Whereas, I'm a fan of this Build-A-Figure, but really, this is the Onslaught I would have loved to have seen the Marvel Legends tackle. Next up here is Wolverine Unleashed, aka Boneclaw's Wolverine, packaged here with Franklin Richards, which might seem like an odd combination of characters to combine, but if you've read the Onslaught saga, Onslaught, to become the prominent psychic being on the planet, did kidnap Franklin Richards and X-Man Nate Grey in an attempt to negate their powers against him. Something a bit curious about this figure is he's pictured here with a red bandana both in the back card art and in the promotional image. And in the comics he never actually wore a red bandana, it was always this blue one. So this was never really a popular look for Wolverine among the fans. It's something at the time, the story I quite enjoyed, the revelation that once Wolverine's adamantium was removed, that he did in fact have bone claws. I thought that was a kind of interesting story, but I think the fans wanted the adamantium back into Wolverine as quickly as possible, which Marvel did bow down to quite quickly. Now, an annoying thing about this figure, the way his legs are posed, it's really difficult to get this figure balanced standing. I mean, if you're displaying him on a shelf, you really need to tiptoe around or he just tumbles. And the figure features all the standard articulation of the time, arms, legs, head. It does also feature extendable claws. Which is pretty cool. Stand. Oh, no, stand. See what I mean? Annoying! As you saw previously, this Wolverine Unleashed figure came with this pack-in Franklin Richards, which features no articulation. But there is some really, I think, decent sculpting on this figure's face, especially. I mean, I think the face is a much better sculpt than the Marvel Legends Franklin Richards that came out in the Fantastic Four box set. Next up here for me is the most disappointing figure in the Onslaught series. It's Jean Grey, and when I first saw the promotional images for this series in Toy Fair, after Onslaught, Jean Grey was the one I was most excited about, because Jean Grey had never really been represented in figure form that well by Toy Biz. They'd never really produced a figure with Jean in her signature Jim Lee uniform look. And why I say disappointing is this figure is basically impossible to stand up. The way they've sculpted her legs, I mean, at the moment she's being propped up by her various accessories, but I mean, without them you just cannot get this figure to stand up in any way. Grrr. I mean, if they had produced her so she was capable of standing and being displayed, it would have been a pretty decent figure. I mean, other than the outrageously awkward positioning of the legs, it's otherwise a decent figure. And there's good attention to detail in the costume, the face, the hair. Moving on to Jean Grey's accessories, it's a bit of a mixed bag of quite cool looking and inventive and completely crap. The crap part first. Now, telekinesis is a really difficult power to try and realise in action figure form, and I guess it's brave to attempt it, and Toy Biz did. Introducing the Psychic Claw. So it fits over her head, and basically to illustrate her telekinesis, the claw is a pincer movement at the end, which I guess allows her to grab onto things, but I mean, really, you need one hand to hold it on her head. Your second hand is operating the pincer. And with my third hand, I am holding something that the pincer can grab onto. I mean, if I was designing kind of playable features, I would keep it to human biology and never require more hands than a human being has to operate it. But like I said, they made a brave stab at trying to do something. I mean, it's odd, and it's reflected in Jean Grey most, that even though Toy Biz described this as a collector series, I mean, clearly this psychic claw is just something produced to enhance and increase the playability of the figure. So either you're producing a collectible action figure or you're producing something that's entirely playable. And with Jean Grey here, Toy Biz seemed to try and cover both bases. And ultimately, it's the kind of notion that if you throw enough shit at the wall, something will stick. And I'm not sure any shit stuck in this case. But moving on to the cooler part of her accessories. It's a little Juggernaut figure. This is the Cyttorak gem. I'm not sure on the pronunciation of that. Someone may correct me here. But Juggernaut actually fits inside the gem. Now the gem in a Marvel continuity is actually the source of Juggernaut's power. And in the Onslaught saga, once Juggernaut had found out the identity of Onslaught, Onslaught actually trapped Juggernaut inside the crystal, so that Juggernaut would never reveal Onslaught's secret identity. And it's kind of cool. Well, within the series, the scale is just entirely inconsistent. For instance, Jean Grey here somehow manages to be the same size as Onslaught. And it would have been better either if maybe Jean Grey was an inch shorter or Onslaught was an inch bigger. I mean, somehow the scale just doesn't work for me when you compare the figures. Now you can all breathe a collective sigh of relief here, because I'm now finishing up with the last figure in the series. It's Apocalypse Rising, and this figure is incredibly true to the comic book art, with his mummification in the way that Apocalypse regenerated himself. It's a pretty cool looking action figure. Again, I mean, I would prefer it to be a neutral pose, but it's pretty decent looking. And now Apocalypse was packed here with his servant Ozymandias. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, who knows. And again, like Franklin Richards, it's not an articulated figure, it's just a pack-in figure on a base. He does revolve on the base, but that's its only articulation. Anyway, that's me done here now. I hope you've enjoyed this time travel back into simpler and more innocent action figure times, and I will see you all later in the next video. Ta-ta.